Rain poured over the dim streets as Mia clutched a small blanket to her chest. The baby inside whimpered softly, unaware that the world outside had just turned its back on them. Only an hour ago, MIA's parents had slammed the door shut, their voices still echoed in her head. You made your choice. Now live with it. 17. Homeless. A mother. The weight of those words pressed down on her like the rain soaking through her hoodie. She had nowhere to go. No money. No one to call. Each step she took felt heavier, her shoes squelching in the puddles as if the world itself was trying to swallow her whole. She found herself near a park bench, trembling, trying to shield her baby from the cold. The city lights blurred through her tears. People passed by, glancing for a second, then turning away. To them, she was invisible, just another mistake in a world too busy to care. But then, from the corner of her eye, she saw a figure approaching. Slow, steady steps. A cane tapping against the pavement. An elderly woman, wrapped in mismatched layers, humming an old tune that didn't quite belong to the moment. Her grey curls framed a face that looked far too calm for a night like this. Mia stiffened as the woman stopped in front of her. Cold night, isn't it? The stranger said, her voice oddly cheerful. Mia nodded but didn't speak. The woman's gaze dropped to the baby, then back to Mia. You look like someone who needs a warm place to rest. MIA's heart raced. Who was this woman? Why did she care? And why, despite every warning she'd ever heard, did something inside her whisper that this stranger might be her only chance? Just a few months ago, MIA's life had looked so different. She was the quiet girl in her last year of high school, always sitting in the back row, doodling in her notebook while trying to keep her eyes open through long lectures. Her biggest worry then had been exams and whether she'd get into art school. But then she met Ryan. He was older, charming in that careless way that made her feel seen. For the first time, someone listened to her, laughed with her, told her she mattered. It felt like love, at least, what a 17-year-old believed love was. When she found out she was pregnant, her world tilted. She'd stared at the test in her shaking hands, her heart thundering so loudly she thought the whole neighborhood could hear. At first, she tried to tell herself it couldn't be real. But it was. And when she finally told her parents, their faces hardened into something she had never seen before, disappointment mixed with shame. They argued for weeks. Her mother cried. Her father yelled. They told her she had ruined her future, thrown away everything they'd planned for her. But Mia didn't want to give up her baby. She couldn't. That was when the distance began. Cold meals, silent dinners, no more goodnight hugs. Her room felt smaller each day, the air thicker, until one night, her father finally said, "You can't stay here anymore." The words hit harder than any slap could. So she packed a small bag, stuffed in some diapers, and left. The streets were colder than she expected, harsher than she was ready for. She spent the first night near a bus stop, pretending she was waiting for someone. The second night in a doorway, clutching her crying baby and praying morning would come faster. Hunger gnawed her, but fear kept her awake. She thought about going to a shelter, but the thought of walking in alone, judged, pitted, made her freeze every time. By the third night, she felt invisible. People avoided her eyes. Cars sped past. Even the stars seemed to have turned their backs. The only sound that reminded her she was still alive was the baby's soft breathing against her chest. That tiny heartbeat gave her a reason to keep moving. Then came that old woman, the one who didn't just glance and walk away. Her clothes looked like they belonged in a thrift store from another century, but her eyes sparkled with something Mia hadn't seen in a long time. Curiosity, not judgment. She introduced herself as Edith. She didn't ask questions right away, just offered a cup of steaming tea from a flask she carried in her bag. Mia hesitated, but the warmth was too tempting. She took a sip, her hand shaking so badly that some spilled onto her sleeve. Edith sat beside her on the bench, humming softly like they had all the time in the world. "You're young," she said, tilting her head. "And tired. Let's fix at least one of those things tonight." Mia didn't understand what she meant until Edith stood up and gestured toward a side street. "Come along. My cat hates guests, but I suspect she'll make an exception for a baby." It sounded crazy. Following a stranger in the middle of the night? Every voice in her head screamed no. But the baby stirred in her arms, and the wind picked up, sharp against her skin. She looked at Edith's wrinkled hand, outstretched and patient, then back at the dark park behind her. Mia took a breath. Then, With one final glance toward the empty street, she followed. The sound of the cane tapping against the pavement echoed through the night, steady, certain, as if leading her somewhere she was meant to be. The narrow street wound between old houses, their windows glowing faintly in the rain. Mia followed a few steps behind the elderly woman, her arms tightening around her baby with every gust of wind. The woman's cane tapped rhythmically against the pavement, a strange comfort in the quiet night. They stopped in front of a house that looked as though it had grown tired of standing. Its paint peeled, its porch sagged, and ivy crawled up the sides like long green fingers. Yet warm light glowed from the windows, flickering gently through lace curtains. "This is it," the woman said cheerfully, pushing open the creaky gate. "Don't mind the garden. It has a mind of its own." Mia hesitated at the entrance. She didn't know what was scarier, the thought of staying outside in the cold or stepping into a stranger's home. But when the baby let out a small, hungry cry, the decision was made for her. She followed the woman up the porch steps and into a hallway that smelled of lavender, dust, and something freshly baked. The walls were cluttered with paintings, clocks, and shelves full of trinkets, ceramic cats, glass bottles, and books stacked like towers. A black and white cat darted across the floor, pausing only to hiss at Mia before disappearing into another room. "Don't take it personally," the woman said with a grin. "That's Mabel. She doesn't even like me most days." Mia managed a nervous smile. I'm Mia," she whispered. "Well, Mia," the woman said, hanging her coat on a hook, "you look like you need a bit of warmth. Kettle's already on." She moved toward the kitchen with surprising energy, humming the same tune Mia had heard earlier in the park. Mia sat carefully on the edge of a worn-out armchair. It sagged under her weight, and she clutched her baby closer. Her eyes wandered across the room, photos of strangers, a record player, a tall grandfather clock ticking softly. Everything felt old, yet alive. The woman returned with 2 mugs of steaming cocoa and a small bottle of milk. "For the little one," she said, smiling as she handed them over. "Now, before you start thinking I'm some kind of witch, you should know I don't bite. At least, not on Mondays." Mia blinked, unsure how to respond. The woman laughed at her own joke, then plopped down into a rocking chair opposite her. "You can stay tonight. We'll figure out the rest later. The couch pulls out, a bit lumpy, but better than a park bench." Mia's eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. No one had shown her kindness in weeks. She mumbled a thank you, but the words came out small and shaky. "What's her name?" the woman asked gently, nodding at the baby. "Luna," Mia said softly. "Lovely name. My husband used to say the moon watches over lost souls. Seems fitting, doesn't it?" Mia nodded, unable to speak. She watched as the woman rocked slowly, the chair creaking in rhythm with the clock. For the first time in days, Mia felt her shoulders loosen, her heart beat slow. When she finally laid the baby down on a folded blanket, the woman, Edith, as she later introduced herself, covered them both with an old quilt. "Sleep," she said. "Morning always makes things look less impossible." But as Mia closed her eyes, a strange thought drifted through her tired mind. Who was Edith, really? Why did she live alone in this strange house full of memories? And why did her eyes, kind as they were, hold a hint of something deeper, something that felt like she'd been waiting for someone just like Mia to arrive? Morning light slipped through the curtains, painting soft patterns on the wooden floor. For a moment, Mia didn't remember where she was. The smell of coffee and toast drifted through the air, replacing the damp chill of the streets she had grown used to. Then the baby stirred beside her, and reality returned. She was in Edith's house. She sat up, blinking at the odd decorations that filled the room. Wind chimes hung from the ceiling. A collection of teapots lined the mantel. On one wall, a crooked sign read "Normal is overrated." It made her smile for the first time in days. In the kitchen, Edith was already busy. She wore a long apron covered in paint splatters and floral prints, her grey curls tied up with a ribbon that didn't match. She hummed as she flipped pancakes on an ancient stove. "Good morning, sunshine," Edith said without turning around. "I wasn't sure if you liked pancakes, so I made 6. It's a safe number." Mia laughed quietly. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "Nonsense," Edith replied. "No one should start the day hungry. Especially not when there's a little moonbeam to feed." She nodded toward Luna, who gurgled softly in her blanket. As they ate, Mia noticed how full of stories the house seemed. Every corner had a memory, every shelf a secret. There were photographs of people, smiling faces, unfamiliar but somehow comforting, and stacks of old letters tied with ribbons. When Mia asked about them, Edith only smiled and said, "They're from lives I borrowed for a while." Days turned into weeks. Mia started helping around the house, cooking, cleaning, even tending to the wild garden that looked like it had grown out of a fairy tale. Edith taught her how to make soup from almost nothing, how to fix a broken chair, and how to talk to plants so they'd grow with purpose. At first, Mia thought Edith was simply eccentric, maybe even a little strange. But the more time she spent with her, the more she realized there was method in her madness. The old woman lived by rules that didn't make sense at first but somehow worked. "The world is too noisy," Edith said once while showing Mia how to make candles. "You learn more when you listen to the quiet." Sometimes, they sat together on the porch at night while Luna slept. Edith told stories about her youth, traveling the world, falling in love with a painter, rescuing stray animals. Her life sounded like a book Mia wanted to keep reading. Yet, whenever she asked about family or children, Edith's smile faltered, and she changed the subject. One evening, Mia found an old photo album tucked behind a stack of dusty books. In it were dozens of pictures, Edith as a young woman beside a tall man, then later, a family with a baby girl. The same eyes, the same smile. But the photos stopped abruptly after that. When Edith found her looking, she only said, "Some stories end before they should, dear. That's why we tell new ones." Mia began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: safety. She enrolled in online classes, with Edith insisting, "Brains get rusty if you don't oil them." They made a routine of late-night tea and early morning laughter. The baby grew stronger, giggling whenever Edith made her funny faces. The old woman had a way of turning the simplest moments into something magical. Still, Mia noticed small, curious things. Some nights, Edith would disappear into the attic and stay there for hours. Once, Mia heard her whispering, as if talking to someone unseen. And once, while dusting, Mia found an old newspaper clipping tucked into a book, a photo of a young woman who looked eerily like Mia, standing beside a man with the same gentle eyes as Edith. When she asked about it, Edith just said, "Ah, memories have a funny way of repeating themselves," and went back to humming. Mia didn't push further. Deep down, she sensed that the house, and Edith, held stories not yet ready to be told. For now, it was enough to know that she and her baby had found shelter in the storm. The weeks passed quietly, but peace never stays untested for long. One grey afternoon, as rain tapped gently against the window panes, Mia sat at the kitchen table filling out an online scholarship form. Luna was napping in a small crib beside her, and Edith was humming from the next room, rearranging her endless collection of books. Everything felt almost normal, until a sharp knock broke the calm. Mia froze. Nobody ever came to the house. Edith didn't have visitors, and Mia hadn't told anyone where she was staying. The knock came again, louder this time. Luna stirred, letting out a soft whimper. Edith appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Stay here," she said quietly, walking toward the door. But Mia followed anyway, her heart pounding. When the door swung open, she felt her breath catch in her throat. Standing on the porch, soaked from the rain, was Ryan. He looked older, thinner, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes restless. "Mia," he said, voice trembling between guilt and desperation. "I've been looking for you. I didn't know where you went." MIA's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Memories rushed back, promises he'd broken, messages he'd stopped answering, the silence after she told him about the baby. "Why now?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "I made mistakes," he said quickly. "I want to fix things. I want to see my daughter." Edith's eyes flicked between them. "This is your choice, dear," she said softly, then disappeared into the kitchen, giving them space. Mia didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to scream. Another part wanted to believe him. She looked down at Luna, sleeping peacefully in her crib, and felt the weight of both the past and the future pressing on her shoulders. Ryan took a hesitant step forward. "Please, Mia. I can help now. I've got a job. A place. I miss you." But something about his tone felt off, a little too practiced, a little too late. Before Mia could answer, Edith returned, holding a towel and a stern expression. "You'd better dry off before you catch something," she said, though her voice had an edge sharp enough to cut glass. Ryan hesitated, then stepped inside. The house seemed to shrink around them. As he looked around, his gaze lingered on the old paintings and the flickering candles. "Nice place," he muttered. "Thank you," Edith replied evenly. "It's been a refuge for people who've lost their way." Ryan's jaw tightened. "I'm not lost." "No," she said, looking at Mia. "But some people only find the road when someone else paves it for them." The tension hung heavy in the air. Mia finally stood, her voice steady. "You left when I needed you most. You don't get to show up and pretend that didn't happen." Ryan's face fell. "I'm trying, Mia. Don't I deserve a chance?" Edith's hand rested lightly on MIA's shoulder. "The world is full of second chances," she said softly. "But only if they're earned." Ryan's eyes flickered with something unreadable, anger, maybe pride, before he nodded stiffly. "Fine. But I'll be back." When the door closed behind him, the silence felt louder than the rain outside. Mia sank into a chair, her hands trembling. Edith didn't speak right away. She just poured 2 cups of tea, placed one in front of Mia, and said, "People have a way of testing our peace when we start to heal. The trick is knowing who brings light, and who brings shadow." That night, long after the rain had stopped, Mia stood by the window watching the moon drift between clouds. Luna slept soundly in her arms, and somewhere behind her, Edith hummed that same familiar tune, the one Mia first heard in the park. Only now it felt different, like a promise whispered through time. Mia didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe Ryan would come back. Maybe life would test her again. But one thing was certain, she wasn't the same frightened girl who had walked those streets alone. She had found a home, not made of walls or bricks, but of warmth, wisdom, and a stranger who refused to let the world swallow her whole. And for the first time in her life, she believed that sometimes family doesn't find you by blood, it finds you by heart.